Thank you, James. Next. So we have 15 minutes for questions, answers, and discussions on behalf of the panel. But before that, on behalf of Ashnafi and myself, I'd certainly like to thank Stefano and Lorraine and Jim for fantastic presentations. So the questions and answers session. Again, I'll remind attendees that the Q&A button is right beside the participants. It's next to participants and in between chat. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask the panel, just type in there or else raise your hand. So we have two from attendees, two questions at the moment, and both the moderators, the speakers, and also those that you see in front, Yadin, Rosanna, Louise, Tom, Elliot, are all part of the panel and available to answer questions. So the first question came in from Roberto. Roberto, would you like to ask the panel your question? Roberto Ayala. Okay, so I will read out. Hello, Roberto. Okay, so the question is to all panelists, what is your take on regulating medical equipment repair, OEMs versus in-house CE? So regulation of OEMs versus CE. Anyone from the panel?
I may break the ice, and because this is, of course, a key topic for clinical engineering. And something that has been also somehow, I wouldn't say abused, but especially some of the OEMs took leverage on the regulations on this topic. One thing I would like to make clear, at least from the European perspective, is that the EU directives and the new regulation focuses on the rules for the placing in the market of devices. They do not mandate who is eligible to do maintenance and repair aftermarket. So this is not written in the directives or in the new medical device regulation. One point where we find something about this is on the, I cited the occupational health and safety directives and about safety of workers with their working tools. And it states that especially regarding planned maintenance and regular checks, they must be performed according to the manufacturer specifications. They do not say that it must be the OEM to do those, but whoever does maintenance, it should be according to the manufacturer specifications. So I think this is a key point. And in other sectors, rather than medical devices, just think of automotive in Europe. There has been explicit EU regulations opening the market to more competition about maintenance. So I think that the same should be possible for medical devices, provided that safety is ensured, of course.
That's great, Stefano. And I'd also like to add that, as I mentioned earlier on, under TC 210 Working Group Session 7, there is a new work item. It's titled Medical Device Maintenance Engineering. So the scope of that isn't particularly defined, but that should address certainly an awful lot of the repair issues at the moment. So I'm looking forward to the publication of that when it arrives.
Yeah,
okay.
and sorry, I'm sorry that Jim is not here, but just to mention a point about the US, as far as I know, reading on the web or talking with the colleagues, there is a lot of debate in the US, a very positive debate about the concept of right to repair. And I think this is very useful to follow because it's the more open the discussion, the more shared the solutions, I think, and it's important.
Stefano, that's a very good point. Let me add as when I was president of the American College of Clinical Engineering some 18 years ago, we met with the Food and Drug Administration. Dr. David Kessler was the head of that organization at that time. And the proposal of regulation of medical device repair was on the table. And we've had that discussion, I think, 3 or 4 times in the past decade and a half. It boils down to a general perspective from the clinical engineering side, that if we have access to the tools, documentation, and methodologies, we will be glad to take responsibility and ownership for matching or exceeding the manufacturer's recommendations. And in each case, the manufacturer or the industry has stepped back and said, well, we'd rather not do that, and they've sort of walked away. So we'll have to see how this current period unfolds. But again, clinical engineers are well trained to do this work. And one of the interesting challenges for the vendors is they don't always have a formal documented training program nor a monitoring program, surveillance program that quite meets the rigor that they would be willing to publish. So it's a very interesting and complex topic, and nobody wants to hurt anybody. We want to do the right thing with each device and for each and every patient.
That's great. Thank you, Elliot.
Peter, let me jump in on this issue because it's a very current and important issue to all of us. Stefano is right that he is reading that there is activity going on in the US. Actually, there is a political movement to bring the issue to the US Congress to discuss that and open it to the right for repair, just like you do to washing machines and toasters. But I would like to highlight a subject that we have not addressed sufficiently. We all want to have the right to repair, the right to get spare parts, because sometimes the OEM will not sell spare parts unless there is some conditions met. We can get sometime the software keys and the service manual, etc., but I think we as a profession are failing ourselves by not showing that we are competent. Just by calling ourselves clinical engineers or biomedical equipment technician, Roberto, that is not sufficient. We need to establish a minimum benchmark of competency in the field, and we don't have that. We have to demonstrate that if the manufacturer said, you have to be trained to work on my CT or MRI, you understand not only the hardware, not only the software, but actually the relationship to patient diagnostic and processes of electromagnetic safety, etc., etc. So I believe, Peter, that we are falling short by not putting the emphasis that what we are asking for is based on competency that we can demonstrate, because there are many people in the field providing third-party services that I'm not sure that is competent and is left for debate. We need to make sure that that's not the case in our field.
Okay, no, that's great. And just bringing that question to an end, I'm sorry because we have only 7 minutes left and there are 2 other questions from attendees. So, Tashi Penjori, would you like to ask your question? Hello?
Peter, the participants are not able to speak. You'll have to articulate their questions on their behalf.
Okay, so Tashi, can you send your question again? And in the meantime, there's
we have a very important question from Rosanna about how to improve the post-marketing surveillance effectiveness during the life cycle management of medical device by clinical engineers. And Rosanna has been asking if there are 2 important recommendations how to network with the government agencies. I think this can be also discussed from the panelists, and we can also proceed with other questions during this time. Thank you.
Well, if I may, I think it involves both questions, the previous one and this one. For the post-market surveillance systems, I guess we have a lot of work to do. We don't have we've been seeing the clinical engineers' involvement in this part as a strength in our market. And we have to get more involved in this. And especially because in the post-market surveillance systems, if something goes wrong, the investigation includes the maintenance, what happened with the device from the hospital point of view, or the user that was involved in this part, and the agency, regulatory agency, talking between them to see what's going on in different countries. So the post-market surveillance system, I guess, in some countries it's really useful and it's active. Here in Mexico, as I said, it's just starting, so a lot of professionals don't actually know about it, and they don't get involved. So the post-market surveillance, I think we have to strengthen it and make the link also between the maintenance of the devices and our participation as professionals.
I agree. At the moment, an awful lot of the feedback to government agencies seems to be on alerts and incidents, but not necessarily practicability, usability, effectiveness of technical devices. And it would be good to get those comments as categories of feedback in conjunction with accidents and incidents fed back to government agencies.
So we also have important question from Frank that says, with regard to the new EU MDR, I think, will the manufacturer risk management files for the device available for CE to review? So I think we need the panelists to come up with any suggestions or ideas on this question. Thank you very much.
Well, one of the key new elements introduced by the new medical device regulation is the new EU database with information about medical devices called UDAME, and it's going to go live hopefully in 2022. It should have gone this year, but it's been postponed by 2 years. It will contain a lot of information. Not everything will be public anyway. And honestly, part of my job as a consultancy company, we help companies to develop their technical files for submission and CE mark process. And if I think of the risk management file that we prepare according to ISO 14971, I wouldn't be so happy that that goes public. Not because of some secret or something to hide, but because it's very specialistic documentation, and it could be misleading to read if you don't have the proper knowledge and tools of the methodology. You may see a huge lot of risks that the company is highlighting, but they solved it during the design process of the selection of components and so on. But if you just read it and you are not a specialist in 14971, maybe you may think that the device is more risky than another one because you just don't fully understand the process. So I think that some of the documentation making part of the technical file should go to the regulatory agencies, to the notified bodies, but it's correct that they are not fully disclosed to the public and also to the professional public, in my opinion.
Thank you, Stefan. I think we also have related questions from Tazan Bukhari with related to EUA, how to deal with equipment given EUA in US and UK with countries who have a very strong regulatory system. So I think you can also add on this question, and other panelists, Iliad, Lorena, you can also add on this issue. Thank you.
But maybe this question also is linked to something else I have seen through the chat about problems with the donated equipment. And one very important thing, I think, is that even in normal times, not in COVID emergency, when an equipment gets donated to a hospital, we always tell to the hospital managers that it must go through all the regular process anyway. It doesn't matter if you purchase it, if it's a donation, if it's a temporary device. You must do acceptance testing, put it on the CMMS, regularly check it and everything. Sometimes hospital managers don't understand this, and also the physicians, and they just introduce into service and equipment because, well, it was just donated. And so even in emergency periods like COVID-19, we think that we should strengthen the rules about doing the proper things, about donated, purchased, you name it, equipment. Of course, if you have a patient that is dying and you are really in a full emergency, you do whatever it takes. But it's not very often the case. And you just can say, it's an emergency, let's do whatever we want. There are rules that are not just paperwork, it's about patient safety.
For example, right now in Mexico, we have, as was mentioned, a temporary permit to market the ventilators, and it's just for the time of the emergency. Eventually, all those ventilators that are right now in the hospitals that have this temporary permit, if they don't get a full registration permit to market, they will have to recall it and get it out of the hospitals. And that is kind of complicated for us to see it, how it's going to be done if the manufacturer or the distributor doesn't have all the traceability of where are all these devices. So the part of the recall sometimes, because we don't have this strengthened part done, it's going to be complicated, but I guess we have been promoting that part to be at the lookout of understanding what devices are going to be needed to be taken out of service if they don't comply with the regulatory needs.
We also have important questions on regulations, just for the sake of time, to be addressed, especially how regulation is applied on softwares, applications, as well as wireless, as well as web network storage, different activities. So I think, can we just also add such issues on your comments and experience on this issue, Yadin and the panelists? Thank you very much.